Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you. Welcome to 1 Kings chapter 8. There are 66 verses in this chapter. We're going to begin in verse 2. There's an addition of at the feast. Okay. We're going to find out what feast that is. Hint, it is in the 7th month. Verse 7, it says here, holy things. Significant difference. Holy things in the ark. Versus staves thereof above. Okay. So is this the heavenly pattern? I have a question. Is this the heavenly pattern? Are they covering an ark in heaven that is above? Are the cherubs covering maybe not the ark, but the throne of Elohim in heaven above? So that is a question I would pose to you. There seems to be an earthly pattern that corresponds with the heavenly reality. Just going to take these off. Okay, and verse 9, there's an omission of, on verse 8, sorry. Verse 8, there is an addition of, and there they are unto this day. Okay. Talking about the staves. Verse 9, there's an omission of tables of the covenant. So those are the, it says tables of stone, the tables of the covenant. So that, it's an omission technically, but it was included in the Masoretic as tables of stone. However, the reason why I say this is an omission, because in the Septuagint it specifies that these two tables, where the commandments were written, are not just tables of stone, they are tables that represent the covenant that was made between Adonai and the children of Israel. And then we see how the Masoretic kind of sneaks that in there, a covenant, which I believe, again, is related to the Septuagint. They're just kind of copying what is already there originally. Okay, and significant difference as well in this verse. It says here that Adonai or Yah made the covenant, not the tables. I should say the tablets. So the tablets are not the focus of this verse. It is the covenant made because the tablets were, they were broken. So let's just read the significant part here. The tables of the covenant which Moshe put in Horeb, which Adonai made, and then in brackets, as a covenant with the children of Israel. Versus the two tables of stone put there when Adonai made with the children of Israel. So we can see again, if you're only reading the Masoretic, the focus is on the tablets. So Adonai made the tablets. If there's no insertion, that's what it's saying. But again, they put the insertion there just to cover themselves, because yes, indeed, the focus is the covenant made, not the tablets themselves. Okay, that's enough of that verse. Verse 12 and 13, we're going to see that these verses are not actually, it appears initially that they were added. We're going to see later on that they were in fact, that they are included just later in the Septuagint. So they're not added altogether. We'll see that later on. Verse 15. Concerning David my father versus unto David my father. Okay, verse 19. Proceeded versus shall. So this is a continuous difference we will notice. The verb tenses throughout, whether it's the Septuagint or the Masoretic text, these are dependent on the translator's understanding, because in the original text of both the Septuagint and the Masoretic, the verbs are not conjugated. So it does require an amount of wisdom and understanding the language, the syntax, and all of that. Verse 20, confirmed. Adonai has confirmed versus performed. And then spoke versus promised. We're going to see that continually throughout the text. Verse 21, Adonai or Yah versus he. So which Adonai made with our fathers versus he made. Okay, verse 23, servant versus servants. So it's not actually, it is focusing on King Solomon here. Verse 24, an addition of that you promised him. Verse 25, not be taken versus fail. So this is an interesting difference. Solomon is saying here that there shall not be taken from you a man sitting before me on the throne of Israel. This is what Adonai had told King David. But in the Masoretic it says, there shall not fail you a man in my sight. Okay, so the significant difference we will see just looking ahead here. It says, regarding a man sitting before Adonai, it says, provided, this is the conditional aspect of this, this, I don't want to say promise, but this decree, provided only the children, only thy children shall take heed to their ways. So this is conditional in the Septuagint. So there shall not be taken from you a man sitting before me, provided or only if your children shall take heed to their ways. Okay, however, in the Masoretic, it is unconditional. It's saying, there shall not fail you a man in my sight, so that your children take heed. So that is, I could even say that is a big difference. One is conditional, one is unconditional. So the lineage could end provided that King David's sons disobey and do not take heed to their ways. And we can see, yes, it did indeed end on an earthly level. Verse 27, significant difference once again. It says, there's an omission of with men. Will God, or will Elohim indeed dwell with men? So that was omitted. It's not just dwelling on the earth, but dwelling with men. That is the qualifier. Another significant difference in this verse, suffice thee. So this is, I would say this is a memory verse. A lot of people, Bible students, would remember that the statement that the heaven and heaven of heavens will not or cannot contain you. That is not that I memorized it, but it is something that is comes to mind when you think of, temples containing Elohim. The heaven of heavens cannot contain you. So much to my surprise, it doesn't even say that in the Septuagint. It says, the heaven and heaven of heavens will not suffice thee. So it's not enough for him. Not that it can't contain him, because technically he did come down in the form of a man, in the form of Yeshua, HaMashiach. But we can see it's not sufficient for him. Okay. Verse 28. You shall versus have ye respect. So the difference here is will. Will you look upon my petition? You shall. Or he will, he will look upon my petition. So it's more sure, it's more certain that Adonai would look on the petition versus have ye respect. And I think the tone here is please have ye respect. Okay, one is more sure, one is less sure. Please do this. This is possibly a question in the Septuagint, so let's read it in a form of a question. Yet, O Adonai, Elohim of Israel, I'm going to switch these words around. Shall you look upon my petition? It could be a question. I could be wrong, but I'm going to leave that possibility open. And then there's an addition of to the cry. Hearken or listen to the cry. Verse 30, be gracious versus and forgive. Verse 31, make confession versus the oath, which is the same oath that was mentioned in the same verse. If any man trespass and an oath be laid upon him to cause him to swear, and the oath come. But in the Septuagint it says, if he shall take upon him an oath so that he should swear, he shall come and make confession. So those are two different things. Making an oath and then making a confession. Okay, verse 32, your people Israel, so specific to the people of Israel versus your servants. Verse 34, there's an omission of shall in regards to you shall hear or shall you hear. And then verse 36, the same instance or the same kind of omission, you shall hear from heaven. And then in the same verse, merciful, be merciful versus forgive. And then it says here, show, you shall show them versus you shall, or I should say, you teach them. Verse 37, death, there should be death versus pestilence. Then again in verse 37, it says here, oppress. If their enemy oppress them versus besiege them. Okay, so besiege has a connotation of military strategy, warfare. And then it says here, calamity, every trouble versus whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness. So more focused on illness and disease. Calamity and trouble are more general. Umbrella term can include plague, warfare, and other calamities, for lack of a better term. Okay, we're going to skip over all the way to verse 43. Shall you hear? I should say shall you versus hear. Verse 44, there's an omission of in the name of, and pray in the name of Adonai or Yah. So a lot of people, a lot of Christians will pray in the name of Yeshua, Mashiach. So is this related to that, where we're supposed to pray in the name of, in this verse it says in the name of Adonai. So that's another, that could be a potential can of worms. Are we supposed to pray in the name of Yeshua technically, or the reputation of? And because I've heard some people pray in the name of Adonai or the name of Yah. And, the name that Yeshua has, or the reputation that he's been given, is actually from Adonai, being the son of Adonai. So I don't think that it would be wrong to say, praying in the name of Adonai, or even to pray in the name of Adonai at all. But because the verse exists where it says the name above every name, the name to which every knee should bow, and they say Yeshua HaMashiach, or in the English, Jesus Christ, that poses a problem. It goes against a lot of people's traditions and their, I want to say their firm beliefs. So this would, not that it would throw it on top of its head, but it kind of it's food for thought that you're thinking it's not just the name of Yeshua we're praying in, but even the name of Adonai or the name of Yah. And we know, or at least I believe personally, that Yah is not just the Father, it is also the Son. They're both Yah, but one is the Father and one is the Son. There's a distinction, but they are both Yah or Yod He Vav He, because in the Shema it says Shema Yisrael Adonai, or Yah Eloheinu. Adonai is our Elohim. Adonai Echad, or Yah Echad, meaning Adonai is united. So they're both Adonai, they're both Yah. So if we're thinking that way, using the Shema, yes, you can pray in the name of. But is it just the name of? Are we just looking at the actual name? Or is it expanding to also his reputation, to his characteristics, such as being great in mercy, great in compassion, forgiveness, and so on? Okay, so that's all about verse 44. I think it's an interesting topic. But let's move on to verse 45. It says here, execute judgment versus, execute judgment for them versus maintain their cause. So Adonai will intervene in their favor, the favor of Israel, versus to maintain their cause, which I take to mean is just keeping them, preserving them, or let's just look it up. Let's look at maintain their cause. Okay, let's look that up right now. Let's see how I have to pause this video, this recording. Okay, to do, to produce, to prepare, to use, to spend. Okay, to do, to act. So to act, mishpat, their cause. To act, justice, judgment. So to do justice, to make a decision. Okay, so when you look at the Hebrew, the deeper Hebrew meanings, it's pretty much the same. But I think it's the English translation that makes it, lessens the power of it. So he will execute judgment. He will do judgment for them. He'll maintain their cause. So it just sounds like like an idiom almost. So that's verse 44 or 45. Verse 46, there is a significant difference. You shall bring them. Okay, you shall bring them and deliver them up. Okay, you shall bring them versus be angry with them. So I believe when you read this in the Masoretic and all the other instances where Adonai is angry with his people, this only adds to the argument that the Elohim of the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, as many people will call it. I dislike using that term, but they say there's a distinction between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. The Old Testament God is angry, a tyrant, is, mean, whereas the New Testament God is all loving, forgiving. But we can see in the Septuagint that's just not the case. It says here, you shall bring them, okay, and deliver them up. So he's not always angry. It just makes him attributing anger to Elohim when that's just not the case. All right. Verse 47. They shall turn their hearts versus bethink themselves. So I want to be fair to the Masoretic. It does say repent. So there's an element of turning their hearts in repentance, but bethink themselves just by itself obscures the turning of their hearts. Verse 49, there's an omission of shall. Then shall you hear? So he will hear from heaven. And it says your established dwelling place versus, again, maintain their cause. So this one is more of a difference because as we've read, or as we've researched, maintain their cause means to execute or act on judgment, to execute judgment for them. But this is not executing judgment at all. It means an established dwelling place. It's describing Adonai's abode in heaven. It is his dwelling place that is established. Verse 50, merciful versus forgive. Verse 52, there's an omission of "and your ears." So this is important because we're going to see that right after it says to hear, to hearken, or to listen to them. So how can you listen with only your eyes? Well, you don't listen with your eyes. We do not listen with our eyes. We listen with our ears. So when you omit ears, it just makes less sense. Verse 53, there's another omission. Then spoke Solomon concerning the house. This is the verse I was talking about. That is a parallel to verses, it was 12 and 13 earlier on, where it appeared initially that these verses were added, but no, they are included. Yet there are still omissions when you read, when you really explore this verse. It says here, "Then spoke Solomon concerning the house when he had finished building it," and here's the omission, "he manifested the sun in the heaven." So that was omitted, remains an omission. Adonai said he would dwell in darkness. You build my house, a beautiful house for yourself to dwell in, anew. And the omission is also here, "Behold, is not this written in the book of the song?" So that part was omitted as well. And then in regards to a beautiful house for thyself to dwell in anew, we can see in the Masoretic it is described as not a beautiful house, but a settled place for thee. Let's just go up to verse 12 and 13 so you can see what I'm talking about. "A settled place for thee to abide in forever," versus to dwell in anew. Okay. So that was verse 50, 53. So this is a temple, and it was not made for Adonai to dwell in forever. So that is important because the prophecies do describe a new Jerusalem, a new temple. So he's not going to dwell in this forever, only anew, and that makes more sense, especially in light of the end time prophecies. Verse 56, said versus promised. And then if we look at the Hebrew meaning for promised, it actually does mean to speak, to declare, to pronounce. So it's not that much of a difference when you look at the language. And I feel this could be something that could be looked at even from the beginning of Genesis to even this point, where when you look at the Hebrew, there's going to be an expansion upon the meanings of different words. So a lot of the differences initially that I found could be brought closer, perhaps. Maybe there's less of a difference than I had initially believed. So I want to mention that. That's important. Good words versus good promise. Again, when you look at the Hebrew, it gives us more. It says, in terms of promise, it means speech, words, utterance. And then it says spoke, which he spoke, versus which he promised. Again, continuous difference, or not really a difference, but a continual, not so much of a difference then. Verse 59, thy versus his. Okay, the cause of thy servant. So focusing on Adonai's servant versus his servant. The cause of his servant. Okay. Okay, it's not much of a difference. It's just a matter of language. The cause of your people Israel forever versus Israel the cause of his people Israel at all times as the matter shall require. So one is saying forever, perpetually, forever, for all time, versus at all times. And then there's a conditional part of this, as the matter shall require. So it doesn't seem as permanent or as perpetual, but at all times, yom, okay, yom, I think that's day. Verse 60, an omission of he, Elohim. So let's read it in the Masoretic first. That all the people of the earth may know that Adonai is Elohim, none else. Verses that all the nations of the earth may know that Adonai Elohim, he is Elohim. So how is this different? Well, Elohim is a title. It literally means God. So Adonai Elohim. So this is a title. This is his who he is. It is linked to his name. Okay, I think it's important to mention. And then in verse 61, let our hearts be perfect versus let your heart be perfect. So we can see that King Solomon is just as accountable as the people. He's equally accountable. He's not saying, let your hearts be perfect, but I'm the king, I can do what I want. He's saying, no, let all of our hearts be perfect. So we can see, especially the leader has a greater level. There's a greater level of accountability for the leadership of Israel. There's an omission of walk, or I should say not walk, but holily. To walk also holily. So you walk in a holy manner. Walk in holiness. So don't just walk in his statutes, but you walk in his statutes in a holy way, in a set apart way. So there's a greater standard. Verse 65. This is going back to the feast that was mentioned at the beginning. So Solomon kept the feast versus held a feast. He didn't just create a feast. He didn't invent one. This is the feast that was ordained in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, or that part of Leviticus, describing the Moedim, the feasts of Adonai. And specifically, this is the one that takes place in the 7th month. And I believe it is the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot. And I conclude this because it says that in the next verse, they returned to his tabernacle. That's their tent in the Masoretic, but they're dwelling in tabernacles or tents. So that is the Feast of Tabernacles. That's my conclusion there. And there is an omission of in the house which he built in verse 65. In the house which he built, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So why is this important? Because when keeping this feast, especially the Feast of Tabernacles, it is commanded explicitly to not only eat and drink, but also to rejoice. That is an important aspect of the feast days, and specifically Sukkot. So that's all for this chapter. That was quite a lengthy one. Thank you very much for your time. Till next time, I bid you all Shalom Alechem, Yivarechacha Adonai B'yishmerecha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you. May the Lord protect you and bless you always. And Maranatha.